My name is Marilyn McCabe. I'm a poet living in Saratoga Springs, New York. I've been writing poetry for about 20 years while I've been having a day job and doing other normal life activities. I took myself back to school in my 40s to get an MFA in poetry, and at that point, although I was committed to writing words on a page, I also became introduced to this notion of video poetry through a fellow student who had made a very compelling video poem called War Rug. And when I saw what he was up to, as much as I love the power of words on the page, I thought, well, isn't it interesting to introduce these other elements to either expand upon the words on the page or contradict them or ask questions of them in this other mode of delivery. So The Dark is Shifting Imperceptibly Toward You is the name of the poem that I began to use to build a video poem off of. I wrote it thinking about my mother's aging. She's 96 now and is losing her memory and has lost her ability to live independently. So I was thinking about mortality. So I'd written that poem, and then as I was starting to think about a project to do a video poem with, that sort of struck me as a possibility. And so then I began, just kind of as I was traveling around in my life and in my world, just thinking about images to capture that might speak with that poem. I've been writing poetry for about 20 years, and since I went back to school and got my MFA, I've been able to produce and have published 2 books of poetry, both through a small literary press out of Washington, D.C. called The Wordworks. And so I travel around with a box of books in my car to sell or give out whenever I have the opportunity, and I do readings from those books. And it is out of some of those poems that I've begun creating video poetry. So far, my process is to think solely of writing a poem on the page. It's only after I have a sort of body of work and have felt the urge, I guess, to start working in the visual realm that I think about what I have on the page and think, well, what might be a useful starting point to begin this layered process of video and audio to do a video poem. So I always start on the page. My loyalty is to the page, so this other thing sometimes feels a little disloyal to the page. I have written many poems that have been inspired by visual art or dance or music. So I have an affinity toward visual art anyway, and I have this connection in my own head between what I'm seeing and my poetry. So when I started thinking about the possibilities, it was a little bit of a natural outgrowth of my affinity to visual art anyway. But because I'm a rank amateur at making visual art, I'm really sort of stumbling around in the dark here. So I just kind of grab or think about different ways to, I never want to just simply illustrate the poem I've already written. That would be a disservice to the poem on the page, which I believe should be creating in the reader's mind a whole little world. So what I want to do with the visual and audio element is to maybe take the poem in a different direction that wouldn't initially be obvious with the image in the text, or refute the image in the text, or ask some question of what I'm trying to get at in the text-based poem. So with that sort of amorphous intention in mind, I just sort of start thinking about what I'm seeing in the world, or I'll go into archival visual work and see what might speak to the text. So the first video poem I really worked on was called At Freeman's Farm. And it's a poem that talks about the landscape of war. I was actually at the Saratoga battlefield, and I sort of had this kind of ghostly encounter and was thinking about all the dead that had been laying on the fields in front of me. And then I started thinking about what a warlike species we are and how the world is littered with our war dead. And so I wrote a poem that evokes the landscapes in which we have killed each other. From that, I started thinking about, I got a New York State Council on the Arts grant and had to involve the community somehow in the development of this video poem that I had in mind. So I decided to interview some veterans. And so then I had to ask the question, should I put the veterans on the film, or should I use visuals that are evoking the landscape images? So I decided to just shoot video of the Saratoga battlefield, even though the poem departs from that, and then just use the audio of the veteran interviews. And then I layered that with my voicing the poem, and then I layered my singing a French song about the departure of men to war. And it just, it kind of grows. Once I make one decision, I have to sort of figure out, well, is there something that goes with that or should I stop there? So it's always, just as with when I write a poem, it's a process of building and taking away. It's the same thing with layering the visual and audio. I try to look at a lot of other video poems and movies and TV, and I steal as many ideas as I can. I'm always trying to absorb, new approaches to things. Well, video poetry actually has quite a long history, starting with the kinds of experimental things that people were doing in film, short format film, in the beginning of the history of film. Artaud, for example, was doing fun, weird things with very short format films. Nowadays, the term video poem or cine poem seems to be used to refer to quite a wide variety of things, from just someone reading a poem on film to a really more artistic film approach that may begin from the point of a poem but then takes off in a wildly inventive way. Yeah, there are several international video poem film festivals, so it's quite a thing nowadays. At some point I would like to actually build a poem out of the process of building the video. So generally I've been starting with the text and then building from the text. I'd like to approach it more organically and maybe start with an image and then maybe think of a line or two, and then think of an image and build it more organically that way. So the dark is shifting almost imperceptibly toward you. The visuals that I began using spoke, in my mind, to this issue of the passage of time. So I came upon a merry-go-round, and so that speaks to the circularity, and also it's whimsical and sort of a little bittersweet when you come upon a merry-go-round as an older person. You want to still ride the crazy giraffe, but it feels a little silly, but sometimes you do it anyway. And then, of course, the river, is a fairly common image to use to think about the passage of time. And then in the poem you'll see a leaf making its way down the river. And I liked that because the leaf has had a whole life before we encountered it here in the river, and it's going to have one after it disappears. So I chose those images in the end for that notion of time and its passage, beginnings that you can't see and endings that you can't see.